Welcome to another custom-tailored deep dive. We're looking at a stack of sources today that is just, quite frankly, monolithic.
Oh, it really is. It's a massive undertaking.
Yeah, and because we know you already track the macro shifts in tech and culture, we aren't going to waste your time on the basics. We are going straight into the friction.
Right.
We're pulling together legal alerts from Gunderson, Detmer, King and Spalding, Founders Legal. We've got a rather terrifying cybersecurity threat update from Sentinel Loan.
Terrifying is definitely the word for that one.
Seriously. Plus, journalistic forecasts from the Reuters Institute, market trend reports from Hootsuite, 2-minute reports, and Crystal Infoway. And we're filtering all of that through psychological frameworks from Positive Psychology and the Oriad AI blog.
There's a lot of ground to cover.
It is, but our mission today is to hand you the definitive, unvarnished roadmap to the digital landscape of 2026.
And synthesizing this stack is, it's so necessary right now because the architecture of the web is just fundamentally fractured. We've been operating for years under this assumption of endless digital expansion.
It was growth. Yeah.
Exactly. But we've hit the ceiling. With 5.66 billion social media users globally, which is roughly 68% of the human population, the era of algorithmic expansion is dead.
Wow. 68%.
Right. So platforms just cannot simply grow their user bases anymore. They have to extract more value from the users they already have, and they have to do it in an environment that is completely saturated with synthetic content.
Which means we are no longer living in an era of connection, We're living in an era of profound systemic friction. You open your phone today, and you're immediately hit with, well, what the sources call chaos culture. It's an absolute deluge of AI slop, invisible algorithmic manipulation, and the fallout from these really high-stakes legal wars over who actually controls the data.
And just a quick heads up for you, our listener, before we get into those legal weeds later on. We're going to be unpacking some pretty heavy friction between newly enacted state laws and recent federal executive orders regarding artificial intelligence.
Yeah, that section gets intense.
It does.
Oh.
But we aren't here to play politics or take sides on the partisan aspects of this. Our goal is simply to map out the reality of the compliance landscape impartially so you understand the structural tensions and what they mean for the technology sector.
Exactly. We are looking at the blast radius. We're not picking a team. So let's jump right into the first major shift, because if you want to understand the infrastructure, you really have to look at what's actually flowing through the pipes.
Right, the content itself.
Yeah, the aesthetic-driven, highly curated internet of the 2010s is just gone. It's been entirely cannibalized by chaos culture and this overwhelming flood of AI slop.
I think it's so telling that AI slop was officially crowned the 2025 Word of the Year. It's a perfect, albeit completely depressing indicator of where we are.
Seriously depressing.
The economic reality of generative AI is that the marginal cost of creating content has dropped to absolute zero. And when production costs nothing, the optimal strategy for bad actors and engagement farmers is just to flood the zone with volume.
Flood the zone.
Yeah, our sources estimate that this low-quality synthetic content, ranging from fabricated news articles to those uncanny, repetitive brain rot videos for kids, it now constitutes anywhere from 21 to 33% of the global YouTube feed.
Up to a third of the feed. And it's not just white noise either. It is a highly optimized, incredibly lucrative industry. We're talking about over $117 million in ad revenue being siphoned off by synthetic farms.
It's literal digital space pollution.
It really is.
Okay.
So if you're a human creator or even a brand trying to reach a human, how do you compete with a machine that can iterate 1,000 perfectly lit high-definition videos a minute?
You can't.
Right, you can't compete on polish. You have to pivot to what the machine is inherently incapable of doing.
Which is why we are seeing human creators aggressively lean into vulnerably human aesthetics. If you look at the trending data, the top-performing organic content right now features low-light selfies, completely uncoordinated visuals, raw, stuttering iPhone footage.
It's like the digital equivalent of inviting someone into your house when it's a total mess, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The imperfection is the premium. The messy room is your proof of life.
Precisely. But the Oriad AI blog points out a much deeper psychological layer to this shift, particularly among Gen Z and Gen Alpha, who are really driving this chaos culture.
Yeah, this part was fascinating to me.
It's not just a stylistic rebellion against millennial minimalism. It's actually a psychological defense mechanism. They analyze the rise of what's categorized as meaningless literature or madness literature across social feeds.
Because when you're living in an ecosystem defined by extreme surveillance, where algorithms are parsing every single word you type just to monetize it, pure absurdism becomes your only safe harbor.
Yes.
It's an escape from the exhausting precision of modern communication.
And this brings us to one of the most illustrative anecdotes in all the research, which is the read and reply chaos trend. Specifically, the viral trajectory of a South Korean student named Jibin Yuli on the Ween.
Oh man, this is the perfect encapsulation of why human messiness is winning. So, Jibin Yuli starts off posting very standard vlogs about studying abroad in China, normal, polished content. But her account just exploded, going from under 500,000 to over 4 million followers in a single month when she started posting her genuine, accidental, cross-cultural misunderstandings.
The linguistic breakdowns in her videos are just incredibly specific and entirely organic.
They are hilarious. In one video, she goes to a traditional Chinese medicine clinic. The doctor tells her in Chinese that she's suffering from poor menstruation.
Right.
But because of the tonal complexity and obviously her language barrier, she completely misunderstands the diagnosis and confidently replies as if the doctor just told her she has poor eyesight.
It's so good.
And in another one, an orthopedic doctor asks if she sleeps on her side, and she processes the phrase sleeping sideways as sleeping in the toilet. And the absolute brilliance of it is that she and the doctors just keep the conversation going with total deadpan seriousness. Neither side fully realizes how derailed the interaction actually is.
Now, let's look at the underlying mechanics of why that works so well.
Yeah.
That specific type of comedic tension,
Yeah.
that compounding, straight-faced misunderstanding, is exactly what a large language model cannot replicate.
Because it's trying to be helpful.
Exactly. An LLM is explicitly trained through reinforcement learning from human feedback to be helpful, precise, and corrective. If you introduce a semantic error into a prompt, the AI will attempt to resolve it. It doesn't playfully wallow in the absurdity of human pragmatics.
Right.
Jibin Yuli's content resonated so massively because that genuine chaotic friction is the exact antithesis of AI slop.
But wait, if human imperfection is the only remaining signal of authenticity, doesn't that just become the new meta? Like, how long until the AI companies train models specifically to inject hesitation, bad lighting, and absurd misunderstandings into the synthetic content?
That is the arms race we're currently in, and it leads to a very dark demographic vulnerability that the Sentinel cybersecurity report highlighted. While younger users are using chaos culture as a sort of shield, older users are being absolutely decimated by the polished AI slop.
Yeah, the numbers on that are rough.
Users over the age of 55, who still make up roughly 24% of Facebook's active user base, they're falling for AI-generated disaster relief scams at an unprecedented scale.
Because the scammers don't even have to wait for a real hurricane anymore. They use a generative tool to create a photorealistic image of a flooded neighborhood, spin up a fake GoFundMe, and push it directly into the feeds of demographics that the algorithm knows are highly empathetic and, frankly, possess lower digital literacy regarding synthetic media.
It is a deliberate weaponization of the positivity bias that's common in older demographics. They see a disaster, their instinct is to help, and the friction of verifying the image is just too high for them.
Which raises a massive question about the future of platform architecture. If synthetic content can mimic reality so perfectly that it routinely defrauds users, and human imperfection is the only thing we trust, are platforms going to fundamentally split?
What do you mean by split?
Like, are we going to see the introduction of human-only verified feeds, maybe a tiered subscription model where you pay a premium just to guarantee that the content you're consuming has a verified human chain of custody?
We are already seeing the foundational architecture for that being laid down. The value proposition of a social network used to be the breadth of connectivity. Now, the core value proposition is becoming verification and curation. If a platform cannot guarantee the origin of its content, it becomes a massive liability rather than an asset.
But if the content on the surface is changing this drastically, if it's fracturing into verified human chaos and endless synthetic slop, the underlying routing systems, the algorithms themselves, they have to be evolving to handle it.
And they absolutely are.
And this is where the research gets incredibly dense. We are shifting from an era of reactive engagement into an era of predictive satisfaction, or what the Reuters Institute calls the answer economy.
This is perhaps the most significant under-the-hood paradigm shift of 2026. For the past decade, recommendation engines operated on a very crude mechanism: reactive engagement.
The old clickbait model.
Exactly. If you clicked a sensationalist headline or spent 40 seconds typing an angry reply to a controversial post, the algorithm tagged that interaction as a success. It didn't factor in whether the interaction made you informed or miserable. It only measured the raw caloric burn of your attention.
And we all know exactly how that ended. It optimized for rage, polarized entire populations, and resulted in massive user churn because engagement for engagement's sake is psychologically unsustainable. So the platforms had to pivot. They are now treating trust as a product. And the primary example of this in our sources is Meta's deployment of Andromeda AI.
Andromeda AI represents a shift from reactive metrics to active behavioral analysis. It isn't just looking at the big loud actions like clicks and comments anymore. It's studying the microsignals.
The really quiet stuff.
Yes, what specific images you linger on while scrolling, the tone and frequency of the links you share privately in your direct messages, the exact way you backtrack through a carousel. It synthesizes these passive and active data points to predict what will drive long-term retention.
Okay, so it's playing the long game.
The goal isn't to extract a cheap click today. It is to map your psychological baseline and predict what combination of content will leave you satisfied enough to open the app again tomorrow.
Hold on, I want to challenge that concept for a second. If Andromeda AI is studying my private DMs and my lingering glances to predict exactly what satisfies me, isn't that just a vastly more insidious echo chamber?
That's the debate, yeah.
I mean, the old algorithm threw garbage at me to make me mad. This new algorithm is quietly engineering a perfectly padded room where I only ever see things that comfort me. How is that actually better for the user?
That is the exact friction point privacy advocates are raising right now. It is a transition from a loud manipulation to a silent manipulation. The platforms argue that by optimizing for satisfaction, they are reducing algorithmic toxicity.
Sure, they'd say that.
But you are entirely correct that perfect satisfaction inherently reduces friction. And friction is where learning, debate, and perspective shifting actually happen.
And this demand for frictionless satisfaction is completely restructuring how information is delivered in the first place. According to the Reuters Institute forecasts, we are fully entrenched in the answer economy.
Yes.
The traditional article, like a static 1,000-word piece of text, is essentially obsolete as a primary delivery mechanism.
Because users no longer want to hunt for the narrative. Instead of navigating to a publisher's site to read an analysis, audiences are feeding raw events into their AI assistants with prompts like, explain the impact of this new tax law on my specific income bracket.
The AI just acts as the ultimate disintermediator.
The sources describe content transitioning from static containers into a malleable database. An article isn't a fixed story anymore, it's just a raw data entry point. If you query the AI, it pulls the economic data from paragraph 3, cross-references it with your personal context, and just ignores the rest.
This has forced a complete bifurcation in how platforms present information. The Reuters research identifies two distinct user states in this answer economy. The first is comfort mode.
Which is the default state for most people.
Right. In comfort mode, the user wants frictionless utility. They want summaries, bullet points, suggested calendar actions based on an email. They completely trust the AI to do the heavy lifting.
But because of the AI slop we discussed earlier, users are also incredibly paranoid. So when they encounter something suspicious, like a major geopolitical event or a piece of financial advice, they snap into what the sources call trust mode.
Right, and in trust mode, that frictionless summary is no longer enough. The user demands a digital chain of custody.
Exactly. They require the AI to show its work, demanding primary sources, verifiable citations, and cryptographic proof that the underlying data hasn't been synthetically altered.
Which completely upends the entire digital marketing and publishing industry. I mean, if the algorithm is judging you based on predictive satisfaction and users are bypassing your articles for AI summaries, how do you even measure success anymore? The vanity metrics, follower counts, raw likes, they're totally useless now.
The 2-minute reports and Crystal InfoWay sources detail the new analytical frameworks businesses are forced to adopt. The most critical new metric is dark social attribution.
And just to clarify for everyone, dark social sounds like some kind of cyber criminal thing, but it's actually just private channels, right? Like WhatsApp, Slack, iMessage.
Correct. It refers to the invisible sharing network. If you copy a URL and text it to a colleague, traditional analytics tools lose the attribution string. They just see it as direct traffic.
Right, it's a black box to them.
But in a predictive satisfaction model, a private share in a WhatsApp group is the highest possible indicator of value. Marketing platforms are now utilizing incredibly complex probabilistic models to attribute traffic back to these dark social interactions because that is where actual influence occurs, far away from the public feed.
The sources also emphasize signal quality. So an algorithmic system like Andromeda doesn't care if you passively like the post. But if you save that post to a dedicated folder to reference later, or if you scrubbed backward in a video to rewatch a specific 10-second segment, that high-intent action is weighted exponentially higher.
This all feeds into the ultimate metric of 2026, which is predictive lifetime value, or LTV. Businesses can no longer afford to optimize for single conversions. They have to calculate the holistic value of a user over time.
And there's a specific formula for this now.
There is. The formula the industry relies on is multiplying the average purchase value by the purchase frequency, and then multiplying that result by the customer lifespan.
Let's walk through that with a hypothetical because it sounds a little abstract, but it's how literally every company is surviving right now.
Sure.
Let's say you run a specialized software service. Your average purchase value is $50 a month. The purchase frequency is 12 times a year. And your data predicts the customer lifespan is 3 years. So 50 times 12 is $600 a year times 3 years. Your predictive LTV for that specific user is $1,800.
Exactly. And once you know that LTV is $1,800, you can justify spending $400 in customer acquisition costs just to get them, even if that initial acquisition looks like a massive loss on paper.
Because you aren't buying a click, you're buying an integrated long-term behavioral relationship.
And for the independent creators out there who don't have a team of data scientists running probabilistic models on dark social, the sources offer a really practical lifeline. It's the Get Who to Buy framework.
It is an excellent rounding exercise for this new environment. It forces extreme intentionality.
Walk us through it.
Right. So you define exactly who you want to get, say, mid-level cybersecurity managers. You define who they are currently overwhelmed by compliance updates. You define what you want them to do, audit their IAM protocols by engaging with my weekly deep dive newsletter.
It's brilliantly simple.
If your content doesn't hit every single point of that framework, the predictive algorithms will just orphan it. It won't get seen.
But let's look at the downstream effect of this massive data consolidation. If platforms are ingesting our lingering glances, our private DMs, and our predictive lifetime values to build these perfectly satisfying architectures, the underlying data sets become the most valuable commodities on Earth.
Oh, absolutely.
And when data becomes that valuable, the threat vectors multiply exponentially.
Which brings us to the most alarming section of our stack today, the dark side of the feed. Because the cybersecurity threat update from Centalone makes it very clear that the cyber underworld is no longer just a bunch of guys in hoodies locking up a single laptop.
Far from it.
It is a highly sophisticated, multi-billion-dollar corporate enterprise.
The evolution of ransomware tactics over the last few years has been staggering. We've moved far beyond simple encryption and extortion. The groups operating today, specifically syndicates like ALPHV and Reseda, are utilizing multi-layered psychological and regulatory pressure campaigns.
The regulatory weaponization is what completely blew my mind in this report. Centalone details how these ransomware groups are actually weaponizing the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission against their own victims.
It is a brilliantly insidious tactic. The SEC recently instituted strict rules requiring publicly traded companies to disclose material cybersecurity incidents within 4 business days.
Right. So if a company gets hacked, a ticking clock starts immediately. They have 96 hours to tell the federal government, and by extension their shareholders, that their defense has failed.
Precisely. And the hackers are fully aware of this compliance burden. So an affiliate for a group like ALPHV will breach a corporate network, exfiltrate terabytes of sensitive data, and demand a ransom.
Standard ransomware stuff so far.
Yes, but if the corporate victim tries to stall or attempts to quietly remediate the breach without public disclosure, the hackers will proactively file a whistleblower complaint with the SEC.
They actually tattle on the company they just hacked. They're basically saying to the chief information security officer, if you don't pay us the $5 million ransom today, we are going to ensure the federal government fines you $20 million tomorrow for violating the 4-day disclosure rule.
The attackers have analyzed the bureaucratic compliance frameworks and literally turned them into extortion levers. And the targets they're choosing have shifted as well. They are no longer just going after individual corporate networks. They're attacking the foundational choke points of the digital economy. We are seeing a massive, coordinated spike in attacks on identity access management platforms, or IAMs.
We're talking about the password managers and single sign-on services, right? The LastPasses and 1Passwords of the world.
Yes. If we examine the downstream architecture of a breach like that, it is catastrophic. In the past, if you compromised a vendor, you had access to that vendor's data. But if an advanced persistent threat group compromises a core IAM platform, they aren't just stealing data.
They're taking the keys.
They're stealing the cryptographic keys that govern trust across thousands of interconnected enterprise environments. They can manipulate authentication tokens to move laterally across disparate networks, fully impersonating legitimate administrators.
You compromise the master keymaker, and suddenly you have silent access to every single castle they've ever built a lock for. And the chaos isn't just external. The threat reports detail how these hacker syndicates are imploding from the inside. It operates exactly like cutthroat corporate espionage.
The internal dynamics of ransomware as a service, or RAS, are fascinating. These syndicates operate with core developers who build the malware and then affiliates who actually execute the hacks for a percentage of the ransom.
And there is zero honor among thieves. The sources outline a major incident with a group called No Escape. They pulled a classic exit scam. The core developers essentially shut down their dark web servers, locked the cryptocurrency wallets, and vanished with millions of dollars that were owed to their own affiliate hackers.
Leaving a highly skilled, highly motivated group of cybercriminals suddenly unpaid and furious.
And that's exactly when rival syndicates swoop in. A competing group called Lockbit immediately started running recruitment campaigns on dark web forums, explicitly targeting the disgruntled No Escape affiliates, offering them better commission rates and more reliable infrastructure.
It's literal corporate poaching, just with extortionists.
Exactly.
Fortunately, international law enforcement has recognized that you cannot arrest your way out of this problem one hacker at a time. You have to dismantle the infrastructure. We have seen unprecedented, coordinated global actions.
Like what?
Well, the FBI, in a major operation, seized the primary TOR infrastructure of the Black Cat ALPHV group. They didn't just take down the dark websites, they managed to develop and distribute decryption keys to hundreds of victims, saving them from having to pay the ransoms. Concurrently, Europol executed operations targeting the affiliates of other major groups like Locker Goga and Hive.
It is a massive game of high-stakes whack-a-mole. But let's connect this cyber threat landscape back to the AI slop we were discussing in the first section, because when you combine advanced cyber extortion tactics with generative AI, you don't even need to hack a network to cause catastrophic financial damage. You can just fabricate reality.
This is where we see the transition from traditional cybercrime to synthetic market manipulation. The Reuters Institute source provides a textbook example of this with the Cracker Barrel incident.
Break down the mechanics of that for me, because when you first read it, it sounds like a prank that got out of hand. But it was actually a highly targeted attack.
It was a highly sophisticated disinformation operation designed to exploit algorithmic trading. Bad actors utilized generative AI to create a completely fabricated, highly inflammatory public relations campaign, claiming that the restaurant chain Cracker Barrel was altering its iconic logo and brand identity to appease a specific political demographic.
Completely made up.
Entirely. They generated fake press releases, synthetic images of the new branding, and deployed bot networks to seed this synthetic outrage across social platforms.
And because the AI slop was so high quality, and it played perfectly into the reactive engagement triggers of the old algorithm, real human users saw it, believed it, and started genuinely boycotting and protesting the brand online.
Exactly. The goal was never to steal data from Cracker Barrel. The goal was to manipulate public sentiment so aggressively and so quickly that algorithmic trading bots on Wall Street would detect the negative sentiment spike and begin shorting the company's stock.
Wow.
It is a micro-targeted attack utilizing synthetic pixels to extract real financial value from the equities market.
When you can literally manifest a corporate crisis out of thin air using AI, the concept of truth isn't a philosophical debate anymore. It is a critical security vulnerability.
Which is why the security sources forecast that breaking verification will become a vastly more lucrative industry than breaking news. In the near future, enterprise companies, media organizations, and governments will pay massive premiums for specialized, decentralized cryptographic services that can definitively prove the digital chain of custody of a video or a document.
So, to recap the nightmare so far,
Okay.
we have hyper-advanced cyber syndicates weaponizing federal regulations, algorithms silently predicting our vulnerabilities, and AI being used to manipulate the stock market with fake outrage. Lawmakers are watching this play out, and they are understandably panicking.
Which brings us to the most complex part of our stack, the 2026 legal battlefield.
Right. And again, this is where we must navigate the friction between state-level consumer protections and federal-level economic imperatives. As we noted at the start of our deep dive, we are examining these legal frameworks analytically based purely on the reports from Gunderson, Detmer, King and Spalding, and Founders Legal.
The core issue here is that the technology moved exponentially faster than the federal government could legislate. So in the absence of a unified national policy, individual states panicked and started building their own firewalls. And now, in 2026, all of those state laws are suddenly going into effect at the exact same time.
Let's examine the anatomy of these state laws because they take vastly different approaches. Colorado, for instance, enacted the Colorado AI Act, which becomes fully enforceable in June of 2026. This legislation specifically targets consequential decisions.
Meaning things that actually impact a human life. Like an AI deciding if you get approved for a mortgage, if you get selected for a job interview, or what your health insurance premium should be.
Precisely. The Colorado law requires developers and deployers of high-risk AI systems to implement and document a standard of reasonable care to prevent algorithmic discrimination. If a company's AI denies a loan application based on a biased data parameter, the company cannot claim ignorance. They must legally prove they took reasonable steps to audit the model for that exact bias.
That is a massive compliance burden for a startup. It is. But then you look at California, and they are playing a completely different game. The California Transparency and Frontier Artificial Intelligence Act, or TFAIA, isn't worried about your mortgage application. It is worried about the end of the world.
Literally.
California's legislation is highly targeted at the very apex of the industry. It focuses explicitly on frontier models. The legal definition of a frontier model in this context is an artificial intelligence system trained utilizing computing power greater than 10 to the 26 power floating point operations.
Okay, we definitely need to pause and explain what 10 to the 26 power actually means in the real world, because it sounds like abstract math.
To put that computing power into perspective, training a model at 10 to the 26 FLOPs requires clusters of tens of thousands of the most advanced GPUs available, running continuously for months, consuming the energy equivalent of a small city, and costing hundreds of millions of dollars in compute alone. We are talking about models significantly more powerful than the iterations of GPT-4 that defined the early 2020s.
So California is basically saying, if you are building a digital god, you have to follow our rules.
Essentially, yes. The law requires these frontier developers to implement rigorous, auditable frameworks to prevent catastrophic risks. And California defines a catastrophic risk as an event caused by the AI that results in over $1 billion in economic damage, or mass casualties exceeding 50 people.
Incredible.
Furthermore, California has mandated the embedding of cryptographic watermarks on synthetic content and requires platforms to provide free, accessible AI detection tools to their users.
And it's not just the tech hubs either. Texas has rolled out the Responsible AI Governance Act, or IAGA. This one is fascinating because it focuses heavily on public-facing risks. It legally restricts the deployment of AI systems that can be manipulated to encourage self-harm or generate child exploitation material. But Texas also built in a regulatory sandbox.
The sandbox is a crucial mechanism. It allows AI startups to deploy and test experimental systems in a controlled environment under the supervision of state regulators without the immediate threat of crushing legal liability if something goes wrong.
And then you have New York stepping in to outlaw algorithmic price gouging, ensuring a dynamic pricing model can't spike the cost of your groceries just because it knows you have a high predictive lifetime value. New York is also mandating incredibly strict consumer labels if an advertisement uses an AI-generated synthetic performer instead of a human actor.
If we analyze the macro structure here, we have a fractured, overlapping patchwork of 50 different state regulatory regimes. For a technology enterprise attempting to deploy a unified AI product nationally, this state-by-state compliance matrix is functionally impossible to navigate without absorbing massive legal liabilities.
Which is exactly the argument the federal government is making. In December of 2025, the Trump administration signed a sweeping executive order titled Ensuring a National Policy Framework for Artificial Intelligence. The entire point of this order is federal preemption shutting down the state laws to create one single national rulebook.
The mechanisms deployed by this executive order are aggressive. First, it establishes a dedicated AI litigation task force, directed by the Department of Justice. The mandate of this task force is to proactively identify and legally challenge state AI laws in federal court.
And the legal arguments they are using are really interesting. They aren't just arguing about jurisdiction, they're using the Constitution. The legal sources note that the DOJ is preparing to challenge laws like California's watermarking mandate on First Amendment grounds, arguing that forcing a private company to alter the output of its AI model or compelling them to attach specific warning labels constitutes unconstitutional compelled speech.
Beyond the litigation strategy, the executive order leverages the immense power of federal spending. It explicitly threatens to withhold BEAD funding, broadband equity access and deployment grants, which represent billions of dollars vital for states attempting to build out rural internet infrastructure, from any state that attempts to enforce AI regulations that the administration deems contradictory to the national policy framework.
The logic from the federal side is entirely economic. They are looking at the global board. If U.S. AI companies have to spend 40% of their engineering bandwidth just complying with 50 different state laws, they're going to lose the global AI race to nations that have unified state-sponsored tech sectors. The federal goal is to eliminate the compliance friction to maintain global dominance.
Conversely, the state attorneys general argue that the federal government is effectively stripping away their constitutional authority to protect their citizens from demonstrably dangerous technologies, simply to pad the profit margins of Silicon Valley.
So let's look at the real-world fallout of this tug-of-war. Let's take California's SB 243, the Companion Chatbots Act. This state law says that if you build an AI companion app, it must have built-in suicide prevention protocols and strict guardrails for minors. If the Federal Litigation Task Force successfully preempts California's tech laws under the banner of reducing regulatory burdens, do those consumer safety guardrails legally vanish?
Legally, yes, they could be nullified. However, practically, the technology companies face a massive secondary risk, which is public relations. Even if the federal government says they don't have to include a suicide prevention protocol, no major enterprise wants the headline of their AI companion failing to assist a user in an acute mental health crisis. So we will likely see companies voluntarily maintaining certain guardrails simply for brand preservation.
It is an absolute mess. And if you contrast this American legal thunderdome with what is happening in Europe, the difference is staggering.
The European Union has taken a fundamentally different philosophical approach. Through the implementation of the EU AI Act, combined with GDPR Article 22 regarding automated decision-making, and the EU Data Act, they have constructed a globally applicable, highly structured, tiered risk framework.
They categorized everything clearly. If an AI is deemed an unacceptable risk, like a social scoring system, it is banned entirely. If it is high risk, like medical AI, it faces massive audits. The rules are clear, uniform, and apply across the entire continent. Meanwhile, a U.S. startup in 2026 has to decide whether to spend millions complying with Colorado or ignore Colorado and pray the federal government wins its lawsuit before the state regulators show up at their door.
The consensus advice from the legal sources, Gunderson, Demmer, and King and Spalding, is that businesses cannot afford paralysis. They must build uncertainty-proof governance architectures. This means conducting proactive algorithmic impact assessments, maintaining dynamic AI inventories, and establishing flexible data structures that can pivot instantly depending on which legal regime ultimately prevails.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today. We've looked at the global data saturation, the weaponization of algorithms, cyber syndicates extorting the SEC, and a massive constitutional crisis over who controls artificial intelligence.
It's a heavy load.
It really is. If you are listening to this right now, you are probably feeling a profound sense of technological whiplash. Which brings us to our final and perhaps most important section, reclaiming the mind through digital minimalism and intentional media. Because how do you survive this ecosystem with your sanity intact?
The psychological toll of navigating this friction is not just anecdotal, it is deeply quantifiable. The positive psychology sources emphasize that our neurobiology was not evolved to process the sheer volume of high-arousal stimuli we are currently subjected to. The metrics are alarming. The average human attention span allocated to a single piece of content has degraded to 1.7 seconds, and for Generation Z, who are native to this environment, it hovers around 6.5 seconds.
1.7 seconds. You can't even process a complex thought in 1.7 seconds. You are just reacting to colors and noise.
Exactly. Continuous exposure to frictionless, short-form video feeds fundamentally alters the prefrontal circuitry of the brain, degrading our capacity for sustained attentional control and complex executive functioning. We are chemically training our brains to reject nuance.
Which is why there is a massive cultural backlash happening right now, driven by the philosophy of digital minimalism, a concept originally articulated by computer science professor Cal Newport. And we aren't talking about a digital detox where you go live in a yurt for a week and then come back and binge scroll for
Mm.
10 hours. Digital minimalism is a systemic restructuring of your relationship with technology.
It is rooted in three foundational maxims. The
Hmm.
first is, clutter is expensive.
Yeah.
Every extraneous application, every unprompted push notification, and every unresolved digital obligation levies a cognitive tax on your mental bandwidth.
Right.
The second maxim is, optimization is mandatory. You cannot accept the default settings designed by the platform. You must actively engineer the technology to serve your specific utility.
And the third maxim is the most profound. Intentionality is bliss. But to really understand why intentionality is the cure for 2026, we have to look at the psychological framework that underpins it.
Hmm.
The positive psychology research brings in Charles Snyder's hope theory.
This is a critical psychological distinction. In colloquial terms, we often treat hope as a passive emotion, a wish that things will magically improve. But in clinical psychology, Snyder defines hope as a highly active, cognitive, motivational system. It requires two distinct components.
Duarte.
First is agency, which is the reservoir of goal-directed energy you possess. Second is pathways, which is your cognitive ability to formulate strategic routes to achieve those goals, even when obstacles arise.
I love this framing because the exact inverse of hope theory is what we experience when we open a social feed filled with AI-generated disaster slop and polarized political algorithms. It creates learned helplessness.
Precisely. When an algorithm bombards you with high arousal, catastrophic information that you have absolutely no capacity to influence, it induces a state of systemic powerlessness. Learned helplessness paralyzes your executive function. Snyder's hope theory, by requiring agency and pathways, actively engages it.
And the market is actually reflecting the psychological desperate need for agency. We are seeing a massive surge in what the industry calls intentional media. The forecast suggests that very shortly, over 55% of total digital audience minutes will be consciously allocated to non-news lifestyle content.
We are observing a flight to quality and calmness. Users are actively abandoning free algorithmic rage engines in favor of paid subscriptions to highly curated environments, long-form service journalism, complex digital puzzles, immersive educational platforms, and wellness applications. The friction of having to pay for content is viewed as a necessary filter to keep the chaos out.
So, practically speaking, what are the pathways? How do you operationalize hope theory in your daily digital diet? The sources outline very specific information hygiene protocols. First, do not touch your phone for the first hour after waking up.
The rationale there is neurochemical. When you wake up, your brain is transitioning through vulnerable brainwave states. If you immediately ingest an algorithmic feed, you are surrendering the baseline emotional regulation of your day to a machine optimized for engagement, not your well-being.
Second protocol, use technology specifically to cultivate gratitude. Instead of doom scrolling, deploy your device intentionally. Maintain a private, encrypted digital gratitude journal, or establish a routine of sending one deliberate, substantive message to a different friend every day. Force the device to facilitate human connection rather than synthetic consumption.
And the third protocol is strict limitation. Restrict your consumption of global news to a dedicated 20 to 30-minute window per day and rigorously source that information from verified primary publishers. Information should be treated like a highly potent pharmaceutical,
No.
necessary in the correct dosage, toxic in abundance.
But the real revolution isn't just behavioral, it's infrastructural. Users are finally figuring out how to break the lock-in effect of the major platforms by migrating to decentralized protocols. The sources highlight systems like Bluesky, which operates on the AT protocol, and Farcaster, which recently deployed its Snapchain architecture.
The shift to decentralized protocols represents the most significant redistribution of digital power in the last 20 years. Let's look at the mechanics of the AT protocol, or the Authenticated Transfer Protocol. In a traditional siloed network like Facebook or X, the corporation owns the application interface, the underlying algorithm, and the database containing all of your connections and content. They are inextricably linked.
Right, which means if the CEO wakes up one morning and decides to change the algorithm to prioritize brain rot AI slop, you have to suffer through it because if you delete the app, you lose your entire network of friends. You are trapped.
Exactly. What protocols like AT and Farcaster Snapchain do is decouple the data layer from the application layer. Your identity, your posts, and your social graph, who you follow and who follows you, are stored independently on a decentralized network. The application you use on your phone is just a lens to view that network.
Which introduces the concept of portable identities. If you are using a client application on the AT protocol and the developer implements an algorithm that pushes you toward learned helplessness, you don't lose your audience. You literally just unplug your cryptographic identity, take your entire social graph with you, and plug it into a competing app that offers a chronological feed or a calmer interface.
It is the ultimate manifestation of digital intentionality. The user retains absolute sovereignty over their data and their algorithmic experience. The platforms no longer hold the user hostage. The platforms must continuously earn the user's presence by providing a genuinely satisfying and healthy environment.
It is the difference between being a prisoner in a digital panopticon and being a citizen in a digital republic. You actually have the power to walk away without losing your digital life.
Well said.
We have covered an immense expanse of territory today. We started by mapping the macro forces reshaping the globe, the absolute saturation of the user base, the zero marginal cost economics driving the flood of AI slop, the sophisticated extortion tactics of ransomware syndicates weaponizing federal regulations, and the chaotic constitutional collision between state consumer protections and federal tech dominance.
And we trace those macro forces all the way down to their micro impacts on your personal neurobiology. If there's a unifying thesis to the digital landscape of 2026, it is that the era of passive consumption is categorically over. The algorithms have evolved to predict our baseline satisfaction, the regulatory state is desperately trying to mandate accountability, and the cybercriminal element has professionalized into corporate entities. In an environment this frictionless and complex, your attention is the most heavily contested resource on Earth.
The tools are undeniably more powerful than they have ever been, but the psychological requirement for you to consciously, aggressively direct those tools is the highest it has ever been in human history. Digital minimalism isn't a retreat, it is a tactical defense.
We strongly advise you to audit your digital infrastructure today. Evaluate the applications that have access to your attention. Are they cultivating agency and providing pathways to your goals, as Snyder's hope theory suggests? Or are they optimizing for your learned helplessness? The choice of how to interface with this ecosystem remains, for now, yours to make.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought to consider the next time you open a feed. It builds directly on the implications of Meta's Andromeda AI and the pursuit of predictive satisfaction.
I think I know where you're going with this.
If these advanced recommendation engines successfully map our active behavioral data, studying our lingering glances, analyzing the semantic tone of our private messages, and calculating our predictive lifetime value to construct a perfectly frictionless digital environment that only ever presents us with information engineered to comfort and satisfy us, what happens to human serendipity?
A very good question.
If artificial intelligence successfully anticipates precisely what we desire before we possess the cognitive awareness to ask for it, do we permanently lose the deeply necessary, messy human experience of stumbling into a jarring ideological disagreement? Do we lose the statistical probability of discovering a strange, difficult new passion we never knew we had the capacity to love? We are building machines designed to eliminate all friction, but friction is the mechanism of human growth. Is perfect algorithmic satisfaction actually just the ultimate gilded cage?
That is the defining philosophical friction of this decade, and it is a question every individual will have to resolve for themselves.
Something to dwell on as you curate your feeds this week? Thank you for spending this time with us, diving deep into the realities of 2026. Keep your information hygiene rigorous, protect your agency, and we will see you on the next deep dive.